Welcome back, everybody. This week we will discuss more of the elements and principles of design, and I thought it would be fun to have an assignment that focuses on scale and proportion. Now, I am a little bit biased here, I have to admit. I absolutely love the way that artists use scale and proportion to create meaning, to create units of measurement or comparison between objects. And they're just really interesting ways to create an interaction with a person and the art. So we have scale and proportion that are broken down into different subcategories in our textbook. And so what I want you to do is to find a few images that relate to this topic this week. We will discuss the visual aspects of the artwork, and then we're also going to interpret what we think the artist meant when they used these tools. So if you want, you can go ahead and select Fit to Screen. This is going to show everything on our whiteboard again. And I have a few examples of proportion and scale. So again, if you break these down into different subcategories, you can see how these are developed for a visual narrative. Sometimes it's about creating cohesiveness or something that's visually pleasing to the eye with a composition structure. And so when we think about harmony that can be developed from different elements in an art, these are where you have these different proportions. Now, proportion can also relate to a figure. So we can break down the human body into different units of measurement to create what's known as a canon of proportion. And this is dependent on, a different culture or region. In many cases in the past, these canons of proportion can relate to spirituality or religion. So, for example, we have our Greek canon of proportions. And in ancient Greece, it was all about trying to find the ideal form, right? How do you perfect the human body to represent the Greek gods and goddesses? And there's also just this interest in human anatomy as well. Now, when you compare that to another canon of proportion, like the Egyptian canon of proportion, you can see how this is radically different. So they have a lot of the same themes, right? How do you create a visual component to represent Egyptian god and goddesses or figures of importance? So in their case, it was all about creating these very monumental and static figures. The less like natural they looked to us visually, the more important they were to the overall story. So you can learn more about that when we get to our ancient Egypt chapter. Proportions can also be broken down into just units of measurement in the face. And there are many ways that you can use that to develop work. We can also think about distorted proportions or scale. And here we have just a few examples of that used in ceramics. But one thing I really want us to focus on is the visual narratives. So when we think about scale, it's very important to think about how they are relative in size to one another. So if something is monumental in scale, right, it can be overpowering to you. It can be awe-inspiring. Think about a painting that's as large as a whole wall. And so there is a physical interaction that you have with it and also an emotional interaction. And the same thing happens if you do the flip side of that coin, right? If something is miniature in scale, you're going to interact with it completely different. So something miniature in scale is more intimate. You have to get closer to the art. Maybe it's delicate, maybe it's under glass. And so all of these things impact the way that we interpret and view art. Another thing relative to scale that I'll just briefly talk about is hierarchical scale. So that's usually distorted scale where one figure or object is compared to another. So this is usually used in religious or political arts. For example, you have Honoré Daumier's work called Gargantua. And this is a pretty straightforward political cartoon. I'm sure you can kind of gather what you think this art is about. But the use of hierarchical scale is really effective when comparing their French king to the public, right? You're seeing how it represents social and political inequality and a hierarchy that is not necessarily good for the people. So this is a really effective tool, and even the artist got in so much trouble over this work that he was imprisoned for about 6 months. But this is an artist that was very politically oriented, so it was no surprise to him that he got in trouble. It was kind of the purpose of the art overall. So when you think about your examples here, I just want you to think about, again, ways that artists create meaning, to create comparison, to create units of measurement. And I really look forward to what you come up with for this topic. All right. I hope you have a wonderful day.